childhood memories can be laced with exhilaration and fear. The kind of fear that you don't see coming, but you recognize it immediately and can be succumb to it if you're not careful. It's the kind of fear that danced before me in June of 1961 when my beloved grandfather was preaching a sermon and then dropped dead of a heart attack immediately following delivering that sermon. For me, he was Papa. To my brother, he was the love of our lives. To my beloved grandmother, who had been married to him for many, many years, the same. And to my mother and my father as well, he was delightful. But to many in Detroit, he was Reverend James Arminius Charleston, the beloved senior pastor of St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. His death was so significant that it was announced at a Tiger baseball game in Detroit. I think about that because that was me as a 7-year-old, early adopter in terms of recognizing fear and having to manage the kind of fear that I was going to experience throughout my life. I moved on, I went on to school, and I thought I was going to be married forever. Well, my grandparents had been married, and I thought the same would happen to me. But lo and behold, no, it didn't happen that way. I ended up facing a divorce with 3 children to feed on an entrepreneurial salary. Well, I moved on, and I got my own apartment. I learned how to pay rent, pay all those bills, and I didn't have enough money for a refrigerator. So I learned to go to the grocery store and stock up every other day so that my kids would eat and they would move on and take care of their school responsibilities, and I'd save up for that refrigerator. Fear every single day. The reason why a lot of women stay in marriages because of the fear of being on their own and managing their own lives and their own finances. I know that firsthand. Well, fortunately, I had delightful friends who felt for me. I reached out to them, and they had an extra refrigerator in their vacant apartment that they gave me. Oh, I was so grateful so that I could move on and take care of my responsibilities and my family. We just move on in life. I'm operating as an entrepreneur, not seeing another kind of fear hit me between the eyes. It was when my 17-year-old son, twin brother of Michelle, younger brother of Lorna, the love of our lives, was killed in a single occupant car crash 6 days after graduating from Milton High School in Milton, Massachusetts. If you are a parent, this is something you don't ever want to experience. Yet it was on my shoulders, and that fear once again became magnified and had to be contained. His twin sister, his older sister, the impact of it. He had a full scholarship to Morehouse College, a full academic scholarship. He was going to be in school right next to his sister, his older sister, who was finishing up at Spelman College. His twin sister had been accepted to Tuskegee University, nearby college in Alabama. So they were going to be down in the southern part of our country together, so I thought. Things changed, plans changed, and the fear was gripping until I got control of it and learned how to manage it. Gone were all of his aspirations in the twinkle of an eye. Gone, law school, all those things that were going to take place following his education. And the impact that it had on his twin sister, on his older sister, on his father, on his stepmother, on grandparents, on aunts and uncles, and everybody and all those friends who knew Mikey, the co-captain of the Milton High School Wildcats. Well, you somehow suck it up and you move on. You face your fear and you move on, as I've had to do, not just with personal experiences, but definitely with the rigors of business, being in business for 32 years at this point. Looking pretty good, but still. 32 years, yes. Dealing with the subject of diversity, multiculturalism, and inclusion. Explosive topics. 7 million people on the planet, 300 plus thousand here in the United States. Everybody has an opinion about diversity and multiculturalism. Working with large and small companies, big and small, people who don't want to talk about it, people who look at it as a pariah, all of these people working together. Fear creeping in. And sometimes, if you're not careful, fear can be weaponized and used in terms of misinformation and used against immigrants and other groups within our society. I have 2 sons in love, both immigrants, born outside of the United States and both American citizens. When I think about what they've done to improve themselves and to move on here in this country, and all of the other immigrants who want to come in and those who want to stay, and how fear is being weaponized against them, it is sinful in terms of how we can take fear and use it in that way. Attacks also on race and gender and sexual orientation and gender identity or gender expression and all the other categories of diversity also, if you're not careful, can be weaponized in terms of fear. Well, I look to those who came before me. I look to my parents, my grandparents. I look to my brother and other people in my family. But I also look to friends and beloved friends like this woman, Juanita Jones Abernathy. You may not know who she is, but she was my friend for 46 years. And we just lost her a few weeks ago. She was the beloved wife of Reverend Dr. Ralph David Abernathy, the closest associate to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They were best buds. They did everything together, and they made it possible for me to stand where I am today. I am so grateful that forces brought us together many years ago, and I had the good faith of meeting Juanita and meeting other women in that category, and we bonded and stuck together through all these years. I spoke at her funeral a few weeks ago with dignitaries and public officials and so many others. But I think about Juanita and Ralph and Martin and Coretta and all of the freedom fighters of the civil rights era. You see, Juanita was the orchestrator, the business head of the Montgomery bus boycott. She actually created the business plan for that 381-day experience that launched what is now known as the Civil Rights Movement. I think about the death threats that she received. Her house was bombed. Her husband was hauled off and taken off into jail 44 times so that people could be free in this country. They put fear aside. They decided that their future and the future of so many others, that was more important than how they felt personally. And so when I think about myself and the fears that I may have, I have to look to my dear friend Juanita and so many others in terms of how they have collectively left a legacy so that we can minimize fear. I've brought her up to many of my events, and she's just a delightful now legacy for us to remember. Well, fear, if you're not careful, can creep in. It can be used for the positive, for the good, but so often it will creep in when you least expect it. From a political point of view, unfortunately, we see it an awful lot now, where people use misinformation. They target individuals. They impact people in a way, and they generate that fear over and over again so that people become absolutely afraid of the other. And in many cases, too, from a financial perspective, if someone is trying to start an initiative like a diversity initiative, a multicultural initiative, they'll say, oh no, things are fine. No, we don't need to do anything. We don't have the budget for it. I hear that an awful lot. Or no, we have our diversity under control. So we don't need to move forward. We need to embrace the status quo. That's what people are actually saying, because the status quo is comfortable. When you become uncomfortable and you move forward, then you become vulnerable. And that's when the fear can be generated. And so what we are trying to say is that you want to minimize that as much as possible. Or the individual who says, what's in it for me? I'm 5 years from retiring from this job. Why do I want more work, more responsibility? Why do I want to jeopardize my position when we know that they're having layoffs in my organization? I don't want to rock the boat. And that fear just anchors you in the status quo. Well, what's the solution for it? The solution is pushing past our fear while focusing on our future, just like the freedom fighters, the civil rights era individuals, our ancestors who move forward. You say yes to things. You say and you acknowledge the fear, but you don't let it consume you. It's there. It's real. You're going to have problems and difficulties just like I have, but you push past it in a way where you gain the courage, where you know you can move forward. I saw it with my older daughter just a short while ago. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology. She will have been married almost 13 years in a short while. She is the mother of my granddaughters, who I love. She's a therapist. She is an elected official to her town's Board of Education, and she's a church leader. Yet, earlier this year, someone in a shopping center decided to drive by, a white male, drive by and call her the N-word. And then he moved ahead in his vehicle, and there were other people in that vehicle, and he said the same thing in rapid fire succession. Now, if you don't know what the N-word is, just turn to your neighbor and they'll tell you what it is. I'm not going to say that word. Well, fortunately, my daughter called me on the phone. We had a quick conversation, and she developed the courage, the therapeutic courage, to confront this man who called her the N-word. Yes, she did. He came out of the store. She took her cell phone, and she very politely and discreetly said, "Excuse me, sir. Can you give me a reason why you just called me the N-word?" And he was stunned. But he did not attack her. He did not then call her that name again. They had a 5-minute conversation. Some of his stuff was kind of crazy. And he talked about an official who was born in a crazy country that didn't make any sense at all. He said all that, but he apologized to her 3 times in the space of 5 minutes. Now, what you're seeing here is what happened to be the video that was blurred out. She decided to do that. She uploaded that to her social media platform and got an array of comments that were made. But my daughter decided to take matters into her own hands. She said, enough of this. This doesn't make any sense. And I am going to have a conversation with someone who, for whatever reason, doesn't like me. And then ultimately, she pushed fear beside her, and he apologized 3 times. That's what happens when you have a mind shift. When you take this kind of information and stories and situations that you have in your lives, and you twist it and turn it around so that fear gets evaporated and moves aside so that people can become closer together from a collaborative perspective. Another way that you can operate like this in terms of this mind shift is through travel. I love to travel. I do. I love to travel because it expands your mind. And unfortunately, in the United States, Less than 50% of Americans own passports, which means that they stay in their own confine, they travel on Club Med or whatever, and they don't have a chance to really expand as much as they could. Yet, 95% of the world lives outside of the US. So I am asking you to minimize your fear, put your fear aside, and learn that travel frees your mind. It puts you in another space. I am so grateful that I've had an opportunity to travel to 5 of the 7 continents. I've been to India more times than I can imagine. I'll be back there very shortly. I go to Kenya. I've had a chance to put a young man through high school in Kenya. He's like my son. All these kind of things because you step out of your fear factor and you move ahead. And I fortunately have a chance to take people with me. And so when you're looking at how you can move through the meanders of your life and look at all of your experiences, the mess you've created, the stuff that happens to you, you too can really move ahead. And if you can't travel, you can do all these things: podcast, blogs. Young man on YouTube has 500,000 subscribers. You know what he does? He's in Thailand with his wife. He goes to different restaurants all over Southeast Asia, all over the world. He samples food. He puts his opinion on there, and people exchange information in an engagement perspective. It's a great way to learn. You can also do things like pen pals, and I call it the University of YouTube because there's so much you can learn on there. Or you can have a staycation if you have no money at all. It's okay. It's all right. Or you can go to the United Nations and sit in that building for free. You can take a tour if you'd like, but you can sit there and watch nearly 200 countries pass right by you with the people who come in and out of that building. That can be a way to travel. So there are ways where you can minimize your fear and reorient yourself so that you can become a better person because you manage it. It does not control you or consume you. And ultimately, your fear can be contained so that we know our future will be ours. Thank you so much.